Do you mean you don't mind when I call you an uncaring God? When I say that about you, you don't mind that? And instantly, I found myself falling into that trance once again. Everything all around me seemingly to disappear into nothingness. Just myself and that paper and that trance sensation again. And once again, like metal to a magnet, the pen stuck to the page and began to move round and round. And I watched as the words appeared. Yes, that is correct. I do care immensely, for you are my child and I love you. And when the trance was broken that second time and I saw those words, you are my child and I love you, I burst into tears. And I said to myself, I've done it. I found it. I found him. I found God. I've put my hands on the truth that I've been looking for all this time. And I was ecstatic. I said to myself, this isn't like my friend Debbie, my Christian friend, and her family with their dusty old Bible, with their prayers to the clouds. This is real. And this is true. And what began that night was a back and forth conversation between myself and an invisible but very real being that took control of my body and answered everything that I wrote. One of my first questions that I wrote that night was, you're not going to kill me with lightning like in that dream I had years ago. And falling into a trance, the answer came back, no, I'm not going to kill you. I love you. And I wrote, why haven't I ever heard you before in all these years? And the answer came back, you've never listened before. And for the next couple of hours until 4:30, almost 5 in the morning, this back and forth conversation took place between myself and something that was now inhabiting my body. I believed it was God. I believed it was the same one who had spoken to Neil Donald Walsh in his book. And I never once questioned the possibility that it could be anyone else. As dawn approached, my eyes heavy and tired, I was afraid to end the conversation because I thought this might be the only time in my life this ever happens. What if I lose this moment and never get it back? And one of the last things I wrote that night was, God, I don't want to lose you. Now that we're doing this, I don't want this to end. I don't want to sleep because I don't want this to end. And falling into a trance again, the words came back, don't worry. Now we will be together forever. And so I slept eventually, just for a few hours before I had to go to work. Amazed, because I truly believed I had found spiritual truth, spiritual reality, and in my mind, unquestionably, spiritual good. For the next 2 nights, I repeated the same pattern. I worked during the day, and I remember at work looking at Debbie and her sisters as they went about their job, looking at them with derision, with contempt, with pride, because I felt like, look, I've got the truth, and these Christian fools going on with their old religion, waste of time, their commandments, their do's and don'ts, their thou shalt nots. And I found the truth from the book Conversations with God, that there is no sin and no judgment, and we can live however we please. And I looked down my nose at them, and I would go home after work and go right back to that book, Conversations with God, and right back to the notepad with my own conversation with this spirit being. And over the next 2 nights, that conversation continued. On the second night, I was asking so many questions about life after death. And the responses, whenever I fell into a trance, were the same as what appeared in the book Conversations with God, that after death was reincarnation, the opportunity to come back to earth in a new life with a new body and a new name, if we so chose. And I had never really considered reincarnation seriously before. I must say I didn't particularly enjoy the idea. I liked the idea of being me, the unique identity of me. And I didn't much enjoy the idea of vanishing one day and being replaced or becoming someone else. But this is what I was hearing in this trance, and this is what I was reading in the book. And so I began asking questions in this notepad about relatives who had passed away, my beloved grandmother who passed away when I was just a small boy, and my uncle, who was the only father figure I knew, who had died of a heart attack right in front of me when I was just 9 years old. I was thinking about my uncle and my grandma, and I asked in writing, what about them? Are they with you? Are they in some paradise? Have they been reincarnated? Where are they? And in that moment, nothing happened, no trance, no answer. And I thought, please, God, don't leave me now. I need answers. I need answers to this more than anything else I've asked. Where are they, God? Are they with you? Are they alive? And then suddenly I fell into the deepest trance of all. And I found myself holding that pen in my hands, and the pen floated, as it were, to my left and touched down on the bedroom wall and began moving on the bedroom wall. And my head turned to see the words appearing on my bedroom wall. Yes, they are alive. And once again, just like the first night, I burst into tears. My relatives were alive. They had been reincarnated. They were here somewhere on the earth. And I was thrilled. And so this conversation back and forth continued over the second night, and then into the third day and the third night. And by the third day, I was even able to perceive the voice of this invisible visitor, this invisible companion talking to me, so that as the words appeared on the page in these trances, I could hear the sound of a voice speaking so softly in my mind. Soft, gentle, of no discernible gender. It wasn't very deep like a man's voice, or very high like a woman's voice, just calm and safe sounding. And so the fourth day came. Now, I hadn't told anyone about what was happening to me. Who could I tell? What would I say to them? But by the fourth day, the notepad now filling with these trance conversations that had been happening over hours and hours, I realized as I went to work on that fourth day, I've got to tell someone. And I realized the only person that I could tell was my friend Debbie. And so at work that afternoon, when there was a quiet moment, I took her to one side and I said, Debbie, listen, I've got to tell you something, and I'm being serious here. She said, what is it? I said, I'm talking to God. And for the last few days, I've been talking to God. And she had this look on her face of astonishment. What does he possibly mean? And then I began to describe to her everything I've been sharing with you, all the things that have been happening over the previous few days, the previous few nights. And she was looking at me with this rather narrow sort of view, inquisitive, curious, but not quite believing. I could see it on her face, not quite convinced. And I talked faster and I talked louder, and I explained everything about writing on the wall. And when I talked about that, writing on the wall, the revelation that my deceased loved ones had been reincarnated, when I mentioned that to her, tears ran down my cheeks. And I was such a man's man, I was embarrassed to shed tears in front of my friend. And so the moment the tears ran down my face, I ran out of the room, left Debbie behind, and ran away out of the room, right up to the staff room. And she came and followed me there and found me sat at the table there in the staff room. And she said, now listen to me. Because you cried, I know that you're telling me the truth. I know this isn't one of your games, one of your practical jokes that you play sometimes. I know that this is really happening to you. She said, I know that this is real, but she said, I've got to tell you, as a Christian, I don't believe it's God that you're speaking to. I couldn't believe it. I said, what do you mean it's not God? He told me it's God. She said, I've been a Christian since I was a small girl. This is not the kind of thing that God says, and this is not the way that God speaks to people. She said, I'm sorry, I just don't believe that it's God who you're speaking to. And I asked her, well, if it's not God, who is it that I'm talking to? And as long as I live, I will never forget the look in her eyes, the seriousness, the fear, not for herself, but for me, when she answered that question, if it's not God, then who? And she said very quietly, the devil. And the moment she said, the devil, I heard a soft voice in my head which said, there's no such thing as the devil. And I slammed my hand on the table and I said, Debbie, there's no such thing as the devil. She said, you're talking to the devil. And I said, no, I'm talking to God. He told me he's God. She said, the devil is a liar. He's the father of lies. You're talking to an evil spirit. She said, there's one way that you're going to find out the truth. One way to know for sure who it is that you're talking to. She said, the Holy Bible says that the name of Jesus is the highest name that there is. It is the name above every other name. She said, the next time you speak to this thing, whatever it is, ask it in the name of Jesus Christ to tell you who it is. And she said, it will have to tell you. If it's God, it will say so. If it's an angel, it will say so. She said, if it's something else, it will say so. A voice spoke into my head, which said, you don't need to do that. You know who I am. Trust me and not her. I said, I don't need to do that, Debbie. I know that I'm talking to God. She said, do what I'm saying, and it will settle everything. You'll know for sure who it is you're talking to. And I thought about it, and I thought to myself, you know what? I know that I'm right. I know that I'm right, and my Christian friend is wrong. So I know that if I do what she says, and if I write in the name of Jesus, tell me who you are, I know the answer will come back. I am God, because I know that I'm right and she's wrong. So I said to myself, if I do this, then I can show her that paper and I can show her that I'm right and she's wrong. And I can disprove her silly Christianity and maybe even convince her to come and join me in doing this automatic writing, this trance writing that I've been doing. And so shortly after that, Debbie had a break and she was leaving work for an hour or so. And when she left, she went immediately across the town center where we worked to the same bookshop where I had bought Conversations with God, because I had told her all about the book. And she went and picked up a copy, and immediately alarm bells rang in her head, and she telephoned her mum and she said, Mum, you've got to get our sisters together, get everyone together, and you've got to start praying for Pete because he's communicating with the devil. And so from that moment, they began to pray for me. Meanwhile, back at work, I took a moment to take a piece of paper and a pencil into the men's toilet and sat there in a cubicle, and I did exactly what Debbie had suggested. I wrote down on the paper, in the name of Jesus Christ, tell me who you are, and sat there in that men's room cubicle at work. Nothing happened. No trance, no sensations, no feelings whatsoever. And I sat there looking at the words on the page and read them over again. In the name of Jesus Christ, tell me who you are. And then suddenly I was pulled into that trance state, and the pencil moved across the paper and the words came out, you should have trusted me. And that was all it said. And I thought, well, that's great. It didn't say that it wasn't God, so I presume I'm right and Debbie's wrong. But then I thought to myself, I can't show her this. She won't believe that this paper was written in a real trance state. I'll do it again another time in front of her so she can see it. And so I put that paper in the bin and I went back to work. Later that evening, Debbie returned to work for the evening shift, and she didn't say a word to me. I said hello to her. She walked right past me. She was praying for my soul. Her family at home were praying for my soul. And as I watched her across the room that evening, this feeling of anger, intense anger, began to boil and swell on the inside of me. This angry voice speaking in my ears. Look at your Christian friend. She thinks she's so much better than you. That's how these Christians are, so much holier than thou. Why do you have anything to do with them at all? And on and on and on, this rising, swelling anger on the inside of me. And at the end of the shift, Debbie and I were the last two people there in the building. Debbie's mum was on the way in the car to come and pick us up. And as we were waiting for Debbie's mum, I confronted Debbie in the staff room upstairs, the same room where she had told me what to do to find out the identity of my invisible companion. And in that room, I roared and screamed and shouted in her face, "How dare you? Who do you think you are?" I found myself speaking about myself in the third person. How are you ever, as a Christian, going to be happy in your heaven, knowing that your friend Pete is burning in hell because he's not coming to heaven with you? He's going to burn in hell. This was what was coming out of my mouth. I was talking like a man possessed, because that's exactly what I was. Shortly after, Debbie's mum arrived, and we got into the car and we drove home. Now, you remember way back earlier in the story, I told you how they lived on the other side of town. But now, after meeting them, they had moved to a house just 5 minutes from my front door, so near to me. So as we drove home that evening, no one said anything in the car. There was no conversation. Debbie's mum was driving, and the rest of us were in the car, and it was complete silence. Only playing out of the CD player were Christian songs, praise and worship songs. And that was the only sound in the car. And I had no idea that these guys were all praying for me. And when I got out of the car, as they dropped me at home that evening, Debbie's mum said, "God bless you," as I left. And I just sort of slammed the door and said, well, I don't want anything to do with their God. And as I went into my house, now at this point, I'm 21 years old, still living at home. My mother was there. My mother's sister was there. And I joined them in the living room and picked up the newspaper and tried reading a few words out of the newspaper. But this heaviness, this burden was weighing down upon me. This fog in my mind was heavy and thick, and this voice spoke into my head and said, "Come upstairs, we need to talk." So immediately I put down the newspaper and retreated up to my bedroom, and I picked up the notepad and the pen. And the moment that I opened up the notepad to a clean page, I fell into that trance, and my hand moved across the page with the pen faster than I believe is humanly possible, writing a list of all the mistakes that I had made in my life, condemnation against me. "This is why everything goes wrong for you," the word said, "because you don't listen. You should have trusted me. Why did you ask me the thing you asked me? You should have believed me and not Debbie. Because you don't listen, because you don't follow instruction. This is why everything goes wrong," and on and angry.